Okay, so welcome back to another share on the four worlds, the Dalet Ilim Asiyah, based on the letter of the Frierdiker Rebbe, printed in this very nice Chasidic Heritage Series book/pamphlet deal. And thus far, we've discussed what is a world, we've discussed why we need four worlds. Now we're going to start getting into some of the details of the worlds, and particularly the world of Atzilus. We're going to be focusing on the world of Atzilus for this class and the class after this in Rosh Hashem. There's a lot to be said about the world of Atzilus. The thing is that another important thing for the world of Atzilus is to appreciate that Atzilus is not the full entirety of existence, which seems obvious because there's three other worlds. But very often Atzilus is kind of placed on a pedestal of Atzilus is the greatest world, Atzilus is the highest, the loftiest of the four worlds. It's important to appreciate where Atzilus stands in the entire macrocosm of the universe. So, to summarize what we did last week, the Frierdiker Rebbe starts off by saying that, with essentially a summary. I mean, not starts off, I'm the one that divided the shiurim, but very conveniently, the paragraph that the Frierdiker Rebbe, the paragraph that we're up to, the Frierdiker Rebbe says that he's going to give a summary. So he says, "Hamur mikol amar umavor," what arises from everything that we've said and that we've explained, in regards to the essence, or not the essence, but what is the existence of the four worlds of Atzilus, Beriyah, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. So it is that all matters in the world, the halls and the 10 spheres and the Merkava and time and place, all of these are things which we discussed which we discussed last week, sorry. So their existence and their concept is in all of the worlds equally. But only that they switch in how they're found, in what they are. So the Frierdiker Rebbe explains, and he says, the existence, what is the existence of Atzilus, is not comparable to what's lower than it, because why? Atzilus is Shuhu Gilei HaHalim Kemadlik Ner Miner. It's like a revelation of what's concealed, and it's like lighting a candle from a candle. This is going to be the main theme of the Teichen that we're going to be discussing, not of the Diukim that we're going to be making in Rosh Hashem, but of the Teichen of today is the mashal of Atzilus existing the way that a candle is lit from a candle. So we'll see in Rosh Hashem soon. So this existence of Atzilus is not the same thing as the existence of Beriyah. L'gabe Mehusa Metzius the Elam of Beriyah, regarding the existence of the world of Beriyah, Shehu Beriyah Yesh Mi'ayin, which is a creation of something from nothing. V'hu Yisoid Dak Ein Bei Mamish, and it's a thin element which has no essence to it, which has no matter to it. So there's a difference in that scale. We say that we have four worlds, and the four worlds all more or less look the same in regards to what they contain. They all have Hecholis, they all have Merkava, Asiyah, etc., so on and so forth. But what they're made out of, in a certain sense, in the same way that you have oxygen and water, that both of them are mediums, both of them have fluid dynamics, and technically speaking, yeah, they all have time and space and all of these things, but it's very different to walk around on dry land, even though we are moving through oxygen and we're pushing through oxygen, and that's the only way that planes are able to fly, is because they're really pushing down on the physical matter of oxygen. But moving around underwater is a very different experience, even though it has many of the same elements, especially time and space, and the fact that you're moving around through a loose but still connected web of matter. But there's that difference in the essence of what exactly is it that you're moving through. So this is only Atzilus and Beriyah. Beriyah is different. The Gabi Mehusa Metzius the Elam HaYetzirah, regarding the existence of the world of Yetzirah. Because in the world of Yetzirah, we don't say that everything is just a refined matter, just the essence of the fact that it exists. We say that now everything in Yetzirah has its own form. Now things, they take on a form. It's not just that they have some level of existence to themselves, they have a form. But when pivot, to contrast Yetzirah with Asiyah, the form of Yetzirah is really the main thing, not the matter, not the full fleshed existence. It's not comparable to the world of Asiyah, where everything is very real, very tachlistic, very grub. So this is the summary of what we've said so far. That we have four worlds, and these four worlds exist in their own ways. But to give it a different dimension, to shift the perspective, is that the four worlds, and what makes them different, in essence, is their essence, is what they're made out of. Atzilus is it's such a refined existence, it doesn't even properly exist. It's we're going to be explaining that in Mitzvah Hashem. I don't want to get too ahead of myself. But then the world of Beriyah is that you have an existence something from nothing. There is truly an existence. The world of Yetzirah is not only do things exist, but they have a form, even though form is a more spiritual concept than matter, but it takes on a form. It has a form. And Asiyah is really just very practical. You don't even necessarily focus on the form. You can see individual trees instead of just seeing the forest. You can see not only just trees, you can see wood, you can see a lumber market, whatever it is. Asiyah is a very practical world. So now we're going to start getting into the Yokim, because there's a line from the Frierdiker Rebbe that when you read it at face value, seems to make no sense. And in Mitzvah Hashem, what we're going to do is we're going to explain how I think the people that put together this very nice pamphlet what they thought about it. Then I want to go back to some very more primary sources of the Rebbe's comments on this. And I think with that, maybe we'll be able to shift the perspectives to see something that maybe the people that put together this pamphlet didn't see themselves when they put it together. So I'll read the line, and I'll translate, and it'll sound funny, and we'll explain. We'll go from there, Mr. Hashem. So someone that looks intensely and works with their mind to plumb the depths of this, we'll see. That from world to world as we go, we come closer and closer to the very spatial existence that we have, which is bound by six sides: up, down, right, left, forward, and backward. Usually we say 3 dimensions, but each of those 3 dimensions have 2 directions. So we have our 6-sided world that we live in, the very practical world. That's not the funny line so far. But the funny line is, even though the world of Asiyah, the world of action, is still an entirely spiritual world, as we will explain in Mitzvah Hashem, this is not to say that it has no scale of comparison to Atzilus, but rather that it is to scale with the lower world, which is an existence. It is, and it has feeling to it. Something that is to say something that could be felt. So what's funny about this? So just to go back to what we said about Asiyah vis-a-vis Atzilus, it says, Hine ein zeh shehu ein areich al ha'atzilus. This is not to say that the world of Asiyah is ein areich to Atzilus. Now usually when you say this is not to say, you're trying to say that actually it is. If I say, I'm not trying to tell you that Asiyah is not comparable to Atzilus, the implication is that Asiyah is actually comparable to Atzilus. Now, for anyone that learns Chassidus, this is a known concept, but we're jumping into this, we're trying to explain the 4 worlds, so we're not going to talk about any known concepts, we're just going to explain things as they are. Atzilus and Asiyah are 2 vastly different things, and there is actually no comparison between them. Atzilus is a world that does not feel any existence. It doesn't have any existence. It's complete godliness. Asiyah is a world where there is existence. Now, there is a scale of comparison to some degree between Asiyah and Beriyah, perhaps. That is to say that they're both existence. They have that much in common. Now, I might be able to say that Beriyah is a very refined existence where you focus only on the very general notion of existence, but at the same time it is an existence. The world of Asiyah is a very practical, a very lowly existence, but an existence nonetheless. Yetzirah, Beriyah, those are also existence. Atzilus there is no existence besides for Hashem. It is completely incomparable to Asiyah. Really, I mean, you have other details in which you could compare them, but the actual essence of what is Asiyah, not just the notion of, it contains halls and it contains spheres, etc., but what is Asiyah actually, what is Atzilus actually, in the same way that you have water and air, this is outer space. Atzilus is, you're completely out there, there's nothing, no molecules floating around, nothing bumping into each other, there's just absolute empty space, there's nothing. True, they both exist in space, but you can't say the weight of absolute nothing compared to the weight of something. Beriyah would be, at least you have a few molecules bumping around, you have something, you can put some weight onto it, it has some level of gravity, it has something to it. Atzilus is the simple, the essence, the empty space, there's absolutely nothing, just to keep with that example. So, when we read this line, it seems funny, and it seems puzzling. So, in this booklet, they put a footnote Gimel. And the footnote Gimel, it goes to, in the back of the booklet, they have somewhat original notes. I'll get to that in a second. And if you look at Gimel in the back of the booklet, it says Chasirim Ezetevis. It's missing some words by the word, and they put this footnote by the Ein Arich, by the word no scale, that there's no comparison. So when you look at this at face value, it seems pretty simple. Okay, so what they're saying is that somehow there are some words missing. How that is, well, I'll get to that in Mitzvah Hashem. There are some words missing in the Frierdiker Rebbe's letter, and these words would explain this line, which makes absolutely no sense when you look at it at face value. And that's probably what the people putting this together thought, because that's why they put the footnote over there. So it's always good to look for more sources and to find better sources. And at the end of the 15th volume of the Frierdiker Rebbe's letters, there is actually a recording of the note that the Rebbe put together of what notes ought to be put on this letter. The Rebbe obviously saw that this letter was important, as was discussed in the first year, and the Rebbe put some comments. So one comment that the Rebbe put was about this paragraph. It's presented as a paragraph over here. About this paragraph, that it's missing a few words. What's interesting, though, is that the Rebbe did not put that note necessarily on this particular line. I mean, he did put it on a particular line, but obviously the lines over here are very different from the original handwritten letter of the Frierdiker Rebbe, or even if it was typed. I believe it was handwritten, but I don't know. But whatever the original letter of the Frierdiker Rebbe was, the Rebbe put the note on the line that begins with the words Hu Ruchni, which is to say the full line, V'meyos Gam Olam Asiyah Hu Ruchni B'Tachlis. So that whole thing, that whole sentence, and onwards until the end of the paragraph, that whole sentence is what the Rebbe says is missing a few words. So I want to suggest for a second to think another thing the Rebbe could have written, which the Rebbe didn't write, and that would really solve the whole problem. Because if you would say that instead of it saying Ein Zeh Shehu Ein Arechel Atzilus, which that translates to, that this is not to say that there is no scale of comparison to Atzilus. If that's what it says, you could change that. You could take out the word Ein. You could add in the letter Beis and take out the letter Vav. And if you do that, you read Hine Ein Zeh Shehu Be'erech Al Atzilus, which is exactly what we know. That, I mean, it's not to say that it's a scale of comparison to Atzilus, which so far it seems like we've been saying that there is some kind of scale of comparison between Asiyah and Atzilus, because we say that they have hulls and they have spheres and they have all of these good things in common. So a person might have been thinking that. If comes the Frierdiker Rebbe and says, no, I'm trying to tell you that it's not like that. That line would make sense. But the Rebbe doesn't say that there's a Torah Sefer over here, that there's a scribal error. The Rebbe doesn't say that something needs to be changed, there was a smudge in the ink. The Rebbe says it's missing a few words. And also, the Rebbe doesn't say about this particular line. He says about the general sentence. So, I want to suggest perhaps what the Rebbe's intention was, which I think is a very good point. And to do that, I need to mention there's another note over there from the Rebbe, which I did not see in this booklet. It's possible that I missed it, but I did not see in this booklet this other note from the Rebbe. This goes back to the first class, where it was mentioned, but it wasn't exactly an important point for then, but it's an important point for now. And the point that the Rebbe makes over there is that the Frierdiker Rebbe says that this world is physical and it is spiritual. So the Rebbe notes over there that must mean that the Frierdiker Rebbe is referring to two different aspects of Asiyah. I just want to read from my notes. The Rebbe says that as it says that this world is spiritual and physical, that line must be referring to Asiyah Gashmi, to physical world of Asiyah, and perforce there must be some words missing explaining about Asiyah Gashmi. So the Rebbe is convinced that there's something missing in that the taken of the first share that we did, the content of the first share that we did, that the Frierdiker Rebbe made a reference to something. He made a reference to the fact that there are two aspects to this world. That there's the spiritual aspect and there's the physical aspect. We say that we're physical beings, but really in our whole perception is a spiritual notion. The fact that we're able to think we have some kind of personality. Usually computers don't have a personality. You might be able to ascribe a personality to them based on repeated interactions. But ultimately, it's all predictable. Humans are also, to a certain extent, predictable. But when I look inside myself, and I hope this is the same for everyone here, but when I appreciate myself, while I do appreciate that I have a body, I feel like so much more than that. I feel like not just a piece of flesh walking around. I feel like I'm a person. I have wants and needs and senses, dimensions, passions, all of these things that go into us. I have that. I'm more than the sum of my parts. I have a soul. A spiritual concept. Not to say, not even getting into religious aspects. I'm just talking about the metaphysical problem which has plagued philosophers for centuries, millennium, of how I'm able to exist as a personality and move around a meat suit, essentially, just a body, a mech, that I can move around as a person. So I have this cross between the spiritual and the physical. Now, the spiritual isn't that lofty, because ultimately my soul is very easily persuaded by milkshakes. So really, there is, like, it's much grubber than Beriyah, it's much grubber than Atzilus. There's no scale of comparison between my spirituality, where I feel myself in the essence of my spirit. That's my main perception of my spirit, is how much I exist. Atzilus is, I don't exist. Atzilus is, there's only Hashem. That's a very big shift in perception, and it's a shift that there's no comparison between them. It goes from something to nothing. So, what's interesting is that you have these two things together. And the Frierdiker Rebbe makes a reference to it, but he doesn't talk about it. He doesn't elaborate. The Rebbe says that, perforce, there must be some words missing explaining about Asiyah Gashmi. That there needs to be something lacking in the Frierdiker Rebbe's original explanation. Now, that's all about before. Right now, we just said, Asiyah is ruchni b'tachlis. It's ultimate spirituality. So, when we take this understanding that the Rebbe says that there's a missing explanation in the idea of physical Asiyah versus spiritual Asiyah, now we can look at this paragraph, we can, like, understanding that that's what's missing, we can understand a whole new light in this paragraph. The paragraph says, and I'll read it again with this new understanding, with the fact that the world of Asiyah is complete spirituality, as we will explain in Res Hashem. So, giving a new dimension to this line, which this line is definitely the line that makes no sense. Maybe this is what clued the Rebbe into the idea that there's more explanation that needs to be given. But the line is not necessarily coming to say that there's no scale of comparison from Asiyah to Atzilus. But rather, you could say the line is taking it as a given that there's no scale of comparison, and rather, it's trying to highlight two aspects of Asiyah. Asiyah is, on the one hand, it's a world. A world like Atzilus and Beriyah and Yetzirah. Now, really, there is no scale of comparison to Atzilus from Asiyah. We said before that Asiyah is the most practical world. It's the practical application of Atzilus, to the point that that is why it is called Asiyah, because Asiyah is the final stage in any plot that we conceive of. The ultimate is what we do about it. If a person sees a poor person walking down the street and feels very bad for them, they know what a poor person is, they have emotions towards that poor person, they start thinking about that poor person, and they're inspired that they want to help that poor person, and then the ultimate stage in that plot, the final, is Asiyah, that they actually reach into their wallet and they give them a few bucks. That is what we said before, is why Asiyah is Asiyah. And in the scale of the four worlds, that is where Asiyah falls in, and that's why Asiyah is called Asiyah. But you could say the Frierdiker Rebbe is coming to bring out another point about Asiyah. And he's saying, the main defining feature of Asiyah is not the fact that Asiyah is so distantly removed from Atzilus. In the same way that we said about ourselves, that we have intellect and we have emotions and we have inspirations and all of these things and they all go into Asiyah. Atzilus is a very far removed thing. Like our soul is in a certain sense far removed from our body in a metaphysical sense. That even though we exist in our bodies, but we have these different inspirations that go on, but all of those are taking place in a worldly sense. Ultimately, I appreciate that I exist above everything that goes on in the world. I exist as a spiritual being, whatever my connections to that world may be. Asiyah is distant from Atzilus to no scale of comparison. But the Frierdiker Rebbe is coming to say, perhaps, everything over here is Yesh Leimar, but the Frierdiker Rebbe is coming to say, perhaps, that this is not the main point of Asiyah. That Asiyah is not only the last stage from Atzilus. Asiyah has something deeper to it. And what is that? But also that it is comparable, it is connected to, and it is to scale with this lowly physical world, the one that has actual existence, the one that I could touch things, the one that I could touch the desk or the laptop or the book, where I'm able to actually move things around. That is what makes Asiyah, in a certain sense, special. So, just to summarize, this line, the funny line, the one where it says that there's no scale, the one that it implies that there's no scale of comparison from Asiyah to Atzilus, this line is coming to say, not that there's no scale of comparison, but it's saying that the main point of Asiyah is not that it has no scale of comparison to Atzilus, but the main point of Asiyah is that it's able to interact with this world. In a very practical sense, it's tied to it. So that's the chap. There's another line later, which is also what we say is Chasar, and over there we'll explain in Mirza Hashem an idea, perhaps, of what the Rebbe is referring to when he says that there's missing a few words, how those missing words got there. It's always a nice excuse to say there's missing words, but we need to understand how they got there. As in, how they didn't get there, how they ended up being lacking. But anyhow, to continue with the same theme, this theme continues that we're able to follow the flow of the letter, and it works with the theme. What the Frierdiker Rebbe goes on to say is that the purpose of creation in general, and of creation of Atzilus particularly, Atzilus particularly, you could say that, is that he wants a world of synthesis. He wants a world where we're able to take the highest of the high and connect it to the lowest of the low. And to that end, to explain how this is possible, the Frierdiker Rebbe goes on to elaborate on how Atzilus was created from the highest of the high, or not really created, you can't say that about Atzilus, Beriyah is the first creation, but how Atzilus was filtered down so that we can be able to have an appreciation of the divine. That's what Atzilus is. The reason for Atzilus's existence, if you could say that about Atzilus, is so that we should be able to appreciate the divine. And I can go on about this, but we have the letter of the Frierdiker Rebbe, so we're able to read that. One of the reasons for the creation of the world is, as explained in Eitz Chaim from Reb Chaim Vital, she'Allah return Yisparich Libres Elam Kadesh Yakiru Gdulasa Yisparich V'Yizku Li Yismarkala, so that we can, Hashem created the world. It arose in His will that He wanted to create the world so that we can recognize His greatness and we can merit to being a Merkava, so we can merit to being a vehicle, in a sense, for godliness in this world, that we can have the highest of the high that is riding on us. And it explains in Chassidus, Shakadosh Baruch Hu Hetzel Olam HaAtzilus B'chdei Shevanivroim Yiyeh Inyan HaChochma VaHaSaga, that Hashem was matzil. He didn't create, but he separated Atzilus, as we explained in previous shiurim. He separated Atzilus so that there should be a relationship that His creations can have wisdom and intellectual grasping of godliness. The lule Atzilus, olam Atzilus layayi ban Ibrahim. If not for the world of Atzilus, we'd be able to exist. We'd be full-fledged creations, but we'd be full-fledged creations without the ability to intellectually grasp godliness. When Hashem separated the world of Atzilus, Hashem gave His creations nature that they're able to have an intellectual grasping of godliness. And now the Frierdiker Rebbe begins to elaborate on the world of Atzilus with the mashal of the candle that we referenced before. Olam Atzilus, the world of Atzilus, even though it is only a revelation of what is concealed. That is to say, you have godliness. Godliness permeates everything. There's no existence to say that godliness permeates all existence. Godliness just is the only thing. Atzilus is a revelation of that of the concealment. If there's nothing to look at it, then you can't say that it's visible. This is going to be something we'll elaborate on in Mitzvah Hashem, so I'm not going to get too caught up on this detail. But, as in elaborate on today in Mitzvah Hashem, it's just very easy to get ahead of myself. It's a very exciting chaymer. So, b'chol zeh, ein zeh she'isa shal haves mamish, hi atzma hayetzis miteich hagacheles, miskalis michutz hagacheles. It's not, if you were using a comparison of a fire and a coal, a flame and a coal, so it's not that the flame that leaves the coal and is revealed outside of the coal. The flame that is inside of the coal stays in the coal, and it doesn't leave. When what leaves the coal is, in a certain sense, it's a new flame. So the old flame stays in its place as it was originally. But rather, it's that the flame, it becomes the source for the flame which leaves the coal. So, just to explain, you have a coal, you have fire inside of the coal. Now, usually we don't think about fire inside of the coal, and the reason why we don't is for the exact point that the Frierdiker Rebbe is making. You can't see it and you can't interact with it. Anything that you are able to interact with as a fire from the coal is going to be fire that is outside of the coal. Otherwise, you'll be touching very, very hot inside of the coal, but you can't really see it. You can't interact with it. Once you're interacting with it, you've brought it out. So, there exists a fire inside of the coal. Depending on how you define fire, I'm sure there's a lot of very interesting definitions of fire about if you have something that's 1,000 degrees, you have something that's 10,000 degrees Celsius, really red hot. Is that a fire? Maybe it's just a piece of molten metal. But whatever the case is, there's definitely heat that's above 450 degrees Fahrenheit inside of that coal, which is the flash point. I don't know the flash point in Celsius. But you definitely have enough to make fire inside of a coal. If you take a stick, touch it to the coal, it'll burst into flames. So you definitely have some kind of existence of fire inside of the coal. But then you have a concept sometimes, you fan the coal, and you have a flame, and the flame is on the outside. So, the Frierdiker Rebbe is saying Atzilus is like compared to the essence. You have the core, you have the coal, the source of the heat, the source of the fire. There's fire inside of the coal. But that fire is not fire in the traditional sense, because fire is something that we see it. Fire has colors, it has dimensions, it has a shape, it dances, it's beautiful. Coal it's a piece of black or red stuff sitting over there. Burning coal and ember. It's just sitting over there. It doesn't have the same shape. It doesn't have the same colors. You're missing all of that expression. Fire is an expression. Fire is expressive. So, the fire is really connected to the fire inside of the coal. And really, it's the same essence. They're made out of the same stuff. They're both heat. That's how we're describing fire. But the fire that's inside of the coal, you skim a little bit off the fire off. It's not to say that you take any fire off. It's the source of the fire, but at the same time, it's missing so much of the dimensions of the fire. Even though that very heat inside of the coal can come out, and it can be the fire, and that's what it does. That heat that's inside of the coal is different, it's distinct. It's not something that we can appreciate. Fire is the chiddush of fire. The novelty of fire is that it's that very essence of heat in a way that we're able to appreciate it by giving it so many more things that we couldn't possibly ascribe to fire inside of a coal. Over here, there's another note of the Rebbe. where there's a Dalit, and it says Chaser. If I remember correctly, there was another language in the original list of the notes that the Rebbe said should be put in. I don't remember the exact language. I don't think I noted it in my notes. But it's very interesting that over here, in this booklet, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Seemingly, they couldn't figure out what was missing over here. This sentence seems to be wrapping itself up very, very nicely, very finely. To be fair, I did add in a lot of context because I did research for this concept so that I can give a share on it. I lifted the idea of the colors and the visibility of the fire. I lifted that from Ayin Beis, which is a long idea expressed by the Rebbe Rashab over the course of 4 years. So that is definitely a good concept. And I would say that really this gives a certain insight into when the Rebbe says something is chaser. I cannot say that I know this as a matter of fact. I would love the original letter. I did look for it. I couldn't find it. I would love to see if there were actually these words in the original letter. I would imagine if they had the original letter, they would have probably just published it with whatever was written there. I don't know that the Rebbe saw the original letter. It would seem, based on the context of these notes that the Rebbe is making, both in the first part and the one that we mentioned today, and this one, that the Rebbe is saying that there's a certain gang, there's a certain direction that the Frierdiker Rebbe is trying to take these things in. And you could see this based on the context of what he's writing. And when the Rebbe says that it's missing, the Rebbe doesn't mean that it's something missing from the original letter, and it doesn't mean that the Frierdiker Rebbe missed out saying something. The line that we said before about how Asiyah is in Arich Atzilus, or that seemingly that it's not like that, really, if you understand the context, you could read that line and it makes sense. It's just missing that context in a certain sense. It's missing that elaboration of the concept of Asiyah vis-a-vis Atzilus or vis-a-vis physicality. And over here as well, this line really wraps itself up. You don't need any extra context. You could just say, okay, yeah, so the fire inside of the coal is the source of the fire that's outside of the coal, and that's that. You don't need to elaborate on the notion of expression, of visibility, of gilui. You don't need to get into that. But it's something which is important for the context of what we're saying over here, what we're about to say, the nimshal. And I think that's really what the Rebbe is saying when he says that it's missing something. It's not to say that there's a lack of the actual letter, that something was cut off from the actual letter. What it is to say is that there's context that we need to appreciate, that we need to elaborate on. And I think it's an important thing to be noted. But anyhow, just to move on to explain actually the nimshal, where the Frierdiker Rebbe is going with this, which we kind of already got into that. But hadugmu mizeh b'sfiris al yenis. The example from this in the upper spheres, that the flame that is inside of the coal is comparable to the 10 spheres that are concealed within the one that's separated from himself. That is to say, the 10 spheres as they are concealed in Hashem himself. There exists an existence of spheres within Hashem. What that concept is a vastly fascinating concept. There's a mimer of V'shalash Olam V'shel Marim of Taf Shin Chaf Hey, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong about that, but it's a really fascinating mimer. I have a very good anecdote about that mimer as well, maybe for after the class. But it's discussed in Chassidus. It's a really, really lofty concept. How do you have 10 spheres that exist by Hashem himself? It's really a crazy concept, but not to elaborate on that too much, because then otherwise this would be a share about the Esser Spheres Agnoses and not a share about the Dalar Elim Habiyah. So, but you have the 10 spheres that are concealed by Hashem. And the 10 spheres that are outside, the flame which is outside of the coal, refers to the 10 spheres of Atzilus. That you have a similar existence to what you have existing by Hashem himself, expressed in Atzilus, a godly expression in Atzilus. Even though, or with the fact that the 10 spheres of Atzilus were separated from the 10 concealed spheres which exist by Hashem, it's not to say that Hashem said, I contain within myself, chas v'shalom, this is already getting a little bit Frierdiker to even express it like this, but it's not to say that Hashem said, I have 10 spheres inside of my left leg, and I'll amputate the 10 spheres, and I'll put them into Atzilus. That's chas v'shalom not what's going on. Hashem has by himself 10 spheres. Hashem expressed those 10 spheres in Atzilus. It's an expression of himself. He expressed himself in the same way that a coal that has heat and fire can express itself in a visible way, in a way that could be appreciated by an onlooker with a flame. Hashem expresses the 10 spheres in Atzilus. It's not that the 10 spheres were removed from their place by Matzal Baruch Hu from Hashem, to become the 10 spheres. The 10 spheres which are concealed by Hashem, they stayed concealed. And from them, the 10 spheres of Atzilus were separated. By the way of example, the one that's used in Rashi, when it says, that Hashem did the same process to Moshe Rabbeinu, that Moshe Rabbeinu was a Navi. I don't know if you could say the exact same process, but in a lower sense, he did the same thing to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was a Navi, the greatest Navi of all time, the greatest Navi that ever will be. And Hashem said there's going to be 70 people, 70 elders, and they're all going to receive a divine spirit from you. And it's not to say that Hashem took some of Moshe Rabbeinu's divine spirit, but what it is to say is that Hashem lit their spirit off of Moshe Rabbeinu like lighting one candle from another. Or lighting a candle from a coal. You touch a wick to the coal, and suddenly a flame will burst up. So, this is exactly the same concept is what Hashem does. Same way that Moshe Rabbeinu has his spirit, and his divine spirit didn't go away. He didn't stop being a prophet after he took his divine spirit and divided it up into 70. That's not what happened. Moshe Rabbeinu was a prophet. He inspired the others, and those others took inspiration without it lessening what happened by Moshe Rabbeinu. The same thing happens with the 10 spheres, the 10 spheres that are concealed by Hashem. It's not that Hashem takes his 10 spheres and gives them down here. Hashem inspires a revelation of what goes on by himself. What goes on by himself stays by himself. But at the same time, now we're able to see it. Now we're able to perceive it. That's the Chiddush of Atzilus, that we're able to see something of godliness. And with this, we can justify the parable of lighting one candle from another candle. The lighting of one candle from another, Atzilus, which is separated from the previous candle. It's not that you've changed the candle in any way. Only what you've done is you've taken some fire, you've taken some light. You've taken only the spiritual aspect of the candle, and not the physical aspect of the candle. In order to light one candle from another, you don't need to take a knife and cut off some of that candle for the next candle. All that you need to do is touch the tops, and the fire just jumps from one to the next. And also by way of comparison, if you light a candle of animal fats, which is simple and crude, from a lamp of olive oil, you did not dirty the olive oil in any way by lighting with a very unrefined candle of animal fats. You didn't dirty the olive oil in any way. Even though the flame came from the olive oil candle. The lighting was still from a candle of fat from a candle of olive oil. So just to explain that last parable in brief, is that even though it's really one and the same flame, the flame is exactly the same as it transfers, but at the same time, the medium which expresses the flame could be different. A candle of olive oil is said in halachic literature to be the purest oil for lighting, and still nowadays we see the same thing, that you have a lot of different candles of paraffin wax or whatever, that they leave a lot of soot when they burn. They can get dirty. Olive oil is very pure. The flame that comes up from it is very consistent. It just stays straight. It doesn't sputter. It doesn't make any mess. It doesn't make any noise. It doesn't make any soot. This is not the case with other kinds of candles, like a candle of animal fat, which I honestly don't think I've ever lit in my life. It's not typically something that they sell. Even the artificial oils, I don't know, artificial isn't really the right word per se, but even the different candles that they make with different mediums, that they're made out of dirtier stuff. Olive oil is very pure. There's a reason why it's expensive. And there's a reason why they don't necessarily make candles out of it all the time. So the point is that even though the medium which is expressing the flame could be changing, the flame itself is the same flame throughout, and one flame doesn't change the next flame. You lighting a candle from one flame doesn't make that suddenly there's going to be a difference in you. I'm saying, and I'm getting too far ahead of myself. Lighting one candle from another doesn't mean that the original candle is now going to take on some of the nature of the second candle, and it doesn't mean that the second candle is going to take on some of the nature of the first. The only thing that's transferring is that revelation of spirituality, that fire, that flame. So I always like to finish this off with a lesson. It's always good. You always got to try to appreciate something. So something that we could try to appreciate for ourselves is that we should try to help other people. And when we help other people, we should appreciate that we don't lose something from ourselves. And not only do we not lose something from ourselves, even if a person would be thinking that, oh, if I help this other person, maybe I'll adopt some of their nature. Maybe it's necessarily a given that sometimes we go out on the same, or we help people that are going through problems sometimes, and sometimes it almost feels negative and it feels depressing to deal with things, and sometimes it just feels like it's a bother, it's a hassle, like we're being weighed down. We should know that maybe sometimes you can drip some animal fats into the candle, but it's not a default. The standard is that we should be able to help people, and it should never drag us down. That we could always give something from our spirit to another person, and just giving that spirit is something which doesn't cause any lack in ourselves, and it only helps them. So just something I think that we could appreciate for ourselves in helping others, which is always the tachlis. That's for the seventh share, Miss Hashem.